Welcome to the fourth session of the Winter Seminar Series. My name is Marty. I'm with the Southern Maryland Resource Conservation and Development, or RC&D, in our Leonardtown office. In the chat, I'm going to place a link to our Facebook page, so if you haven't visited our page yet, you can view all of our upcoming events, check out some of the projects that we're working on. We like to focus on land conservation in the Southern Maryland area. We work on community restoration projects, outreach programs, such as this seminar series. Before I turn the presentation over to Caroline, I'd like to remind everyone that this is a public forum, so please keep everything on the internet appropriate. You're welcome to turn the video on during the presentation if you'd like. It would work best if you use the normal view so that you're able to see Caroline's full presentation. You can unmute your mic at the end of the presentation if you'd like to ask any questions. I'll monitor the chat and try to assist in answering some of your questions. Caroline will also save time at the end to address any other questions that you may have. Caroline DiGiovanni works for the University of the Maryland Extension as a watershed restoration educator covering St. Mary's and Calvert counties. She has a bachelor's in environmental science from the Richard Stockan College of New Jersey, now called the Stockan University. Before coming to the extension in May 2023, Caroline spent over a decade working in organic agriculture, exploring different scales of vegetable production, marketing practices, and thinking about what a truly sustainable system would look like for agricultural workers, the environment, and agricultural animals, and the society. Through her work in the extension, she draws on diverse skill set learned over time in agriculture to educate, organize, and help communities be the best stewards of local and regional water resources that they can be. In her free time, Caroline still enjoys growing, reading seed catalogs, and talking about vegetables. She also enjoys cooking, kayaking, running, swimming, and spending time with friends, family, and her 3 cats. I'd like to start by giving over this presentation to Caroline, and thank you all for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. That was a great introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening for this presentation about how trees can help to protect water resources. I know there's some pretty major entertainment options going on this evening, too, so I'm honored that you would choose me over the Super Bowl.
When does the Super Bowl start?
I think that kicks off.
Yes. You got to watch it.
So if you're not on mute, definitely go ahead and mute yourself for the presentation. The Super Bowl kicks off in 30 minutes. I'm going to ask everyone to just hold your questions till the end or put them into the chat just to keep the flow of the presentation going for the evening. So to start off, University of Maryland Extension programs are open to all, regardless of who you are, where you come from, what you believe. We like to include everyone in our programming. If you ever feel that you haven't been properly included in our programming, there is a process to address that issue. The University of Maryland Extension, just to introduce the entity that I actually work for, is quite literally the extension of the university out into the communities of Maryland. We are housed under the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. There's an extension office in every county and in Baltimore City. We cover all sorts of topics like environmental and natural resources topics, agricultural topics, health and well-being, technology, 4-H, youth development type programming. We cover a very broad range of topics. The program that I work under is the Watershed Protection and Restoration Program. The goal of our WIPRIP team, we call it, Watershed Protection and Restoration, WIPRIP, is to improve water quality through stormwater management, watershed restoration techniques, and building environmentally aware communities. We do this by working with our local community to build their capacity to take care of their own resources by helping them seek out grants for environmental projects. We help them find the proper folks to help them design and implement those projects. And we also do education and outreach programs for communities like this one. This is just our coverage map of the WIPRIP team throughout the state. We work in all areas of the state. So for my objective for this evening with this presentation is to help everyone to understand the water cycle and how land use changes can alter the natural water cycle, what are best management practices, how BMPs all layered together can work to be more effective, where trees fit into this system as a best management practice. And then I also want to make sure I send you all away with actionable ideas of how you can actually help to make positive change. So that's the objective. My little summary is first, I'm going to give some background information. Some of this information might be a review for some, or it might be new concepts depending on your background knowledge. We'll talk about all the different ways trees can help for stormwater management and water protection. And then, like I said in the previous slide, I'll send you away with some actionable things that you can do, like planting new trees, programs to help you do that, what you can do to help protect our current tree canopy, all kinds of different ideas. So to get started, I always like to review the concept of what is a watershed. We all live in a watershed no matter where we are. Our land drains to somewhere. So a watershed is an area of land that all channels the precipitation that lands on that land to the same body of water, such as a lake, stream, reservoir, or bay. Watersheds can be very large. If you see in the one image, this entire green area is the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It's very extensive, covers multiple states and Washington, D.C. You can further break watersheds down into smaller drainages. So in the other image with the different colored drainages, it shows the major watersheds of the Chesapeake Bay, the Susquehanna River, the Potomac River, James, York, Rappahannock. And then you can take those major drainages and further break them down. For example, in the Potomac River in our southern Maryland area, the St. Mary's River nests into the Potomac River watershed. So they're like the little nesting dolls. Watersheds can be large or small. They're also defined by natural geographic boundaries, not political boundaries. So that's why partnership in water resource protection is so important, because multiple political entities can all drain into the same body of water, impacting the quality of that end body of water. So partnership is very important, and it's very important to realize that because we all live in a watershed, the land that we live on, it drains the water. We can all have a positive impact for water quality. Just to review the water cycle, and this will tie into trees and where they fall in the water cycle later in the presentation. In a natural system, the water cycles through processes of condensation, evaporation, precipitation. So you just have this free-flowing cycle. Everything's in balance. The land can absorb water, send it into the groundwater to store there. The groundwater eventually flows to surface water. Eventually, there will be some runoff in a natural system, and that can feed your stream flow. So condensation in the clouds, precipitation onto the land, spreading on the land. Sometimes you can have sublimation, where a solid will go straight to a gas. So snow goes back to the clouds. When we have land use changes, it alters our natural water cycle. So a different title, instead of runoff and different land use, this could also be called how the natural water cycle is altered when we introduce impervious surfaces into the environment. These are things like roadways, driveways, rooftops. So in our natural system, we have very little surface runoff, really good groundwater infiltration rates, recharge of shallow groundwater, and deep infiltration. And then the rest of the water is lost through evaporation off of surfaces and transpiration from trees or evapotranspiration. And then you can see the more and more we develop an area and introduce these impervious surfaces, the greater the volume of runoff, the less infiltration into the groundwater, and the less evapotranspiration. So we've altered the natural water cycle. And our natural streams and waterways cannot handle this change in the runoff regimen. So we have to help them along the way. To break this slide down into actual examples, if you were cruising around looking at aerial photos on a program like a mapping program, this is what your natural forested system looks like. It's a complete intact forest canopy, very obvious. And then the small developed communities where you have some impervious surface, a lot of open grassy areas, and still some forested areas. And then we have more and more development happening, more impervious surfaces, more runoff from the surface, less infiltration into the groundwater. This is an aerial photo right here in our Southern Maryland area near California. So this sort of development is happening in our own area. And of course, you have the really extreme examples of development in cities like Washington, D.C., where you can have areas that have as much as 100% impervious surface. So this is altering the natural water cycle, throwing nature out of balance. So just to make it clear, what is stormwater runoff? What are we really talking about here? It's just the precipitation that runs off of impervious surfaces. And it's a problem because it can pick up pollutants as it flows across the land. So this is a picture of stormwater runoff after a very short rainfall, a summer afternoon storm in a Prince Frederick. And you can see there's a lot of runoff that can be generated in a very short amount of time. A 1,000 square foot area can generate as much as 600 gallons of runoff and a single inch of rain. So the more and more impervious surface, the more huge volumes of water we're moving away from a surface where it used to be able to infiltrate, go back into the ground. So why do we care about the stormwater runoff? Like I said, it can affect water quality in our local and regional waterways. So every time it rains, it's basically rinsing the surface of the earth into the waterways. Things like chemical pollutants can be carried into waterways, sediment can be carried. There can end up being nitrogen and phosphorus impairments in waterways because of stormwater runoff. And then stormwater runoff is also an issue because it can cause water quantity issues like flooding, where if you have huge volumes of runoff happening in an area that's not natural, that waterway can't handle it, it becomes overwhelmed, overtops its banks, and can be a flooding issue. It can also just be a flooding issue in areas where there's nowhere for the water to go anymore, and you get city streets flooding. So what can we do about this change in the water cycle, this excessive amount of stormwater runoff? There's some really basic concepts of stormwater management. We want to slow down the stormwater, spread it out, slow it down, soak it into the ground. And these are just the three most basic ideas behind really any stormwater management practice. How do we do that? We use things called best management practices, or BMPs for short. BMPs can be things like a physical structure, like a rain barrel or a retention basin. These two things detain the stormwater on site, slow it down, and then it can be infiltrated later. And then best management practices can also be actions like reducing mowing in areas to leave more vegetative cover to help slow down the surface flow of stormwater, let the plants grow deeper, more robust roots to help with infiltration. And another example of an action that's a best management practice could be like proper timing of fertilizer applications. For example, you would never want to go fertilize a farm field or your lawn ahead of a rainstorm where you could potentially end up having those nutrients just carried away in any runoff. So best management practices work best when they all partner together in what's called a treatment train. And the best analogy that I can think of for describing a treatment train is an example of soil sieves. Soil sieves are used to sort soil samples into different size fractions of particles. And when you stack all the different sieves all together, they can do a job that one soil sieve alone can't do. So I like to use this analogy when I'm thinking of a best management practice for stormwater. We can't rely on one best management practice to deal with all the stormwater from an entire neighborhood. So if there's multiple management practices in multiple places along the system, you'll have a more robust, resilient system. So an example of a small scale treatment train would be this photo where you have your impervious rooftop going to 2 rain barrels. The rain barrels are your first best management practice in this treatment train. They retain the first fraction of rooftop runoff and treat it by retaining it. And it can be infiltrated later. And then these rain barrels in this diagram then overflow to this rain garden area, and they receive the runoff that the rain barrels cannot capture. So it's a little treatment train. The first 100 gallons or so are captured by the barrels. Maybe the rain garden can handle another 600,000 gallons, and then maybe the rain garden then overflows out to the street that goes to the community retention basin. So having these management practices in place along the way help make systems more resilient to the extreme changing weather patterns that we have, where we have huge amounts of precipitation that maybe that retention basin can't handle all at once by itself. But if everybody in the neighborhood has these little practices, it'll collect enough to help that retention basin be more robust over time. So trees function as part of these best management practice systems for stormwater management, SW stormwater. They help to intercept precipitation in their canopy by retaining that precipitation and detaining and slowing the precipitation down. The trees also help with infiltration. Their roots help keep channels open, and they also can open up storage space in the soil through transpiration when they actually drink that groundwater and use it up. And I'll break down all of these a little further in the following slides. So in doing this research for this presentation, I couldn't help but realize that we like to quantify stormwater management benefits. We want to put numbers on everything. And this is really because we want to be able to get nutrient and sediment reduction credits for our practices to meet the total maximum daily load, the pollution diet reduction goals for the Chesapeake Bay. So in 2010, there was the total maximum daily load for the Chesapeake Bay was established. And this basically said that we need to reduce this much nitrogen, this much phosphorus, and this much sediment to restore the health of the bay. And each jurisdiction in the Bay region was given a reduction goal, and 2025 is the deadline for meeting those reduction goals. Some jurisdictions, states met those goals, some did not. So anytime we start talking about stormwater management, we like to try to attach nutrient and sediment reductions to those things to be able to account for them in meeting these total maximum daily loads. So it was interesting when I was doing research, the exact benefits of trees are really hard to quantify. There's a lot of reasons behind that, why we can't just attach an exact number to a tree. It's where is the tree? Is the tree a city street tree, or is it a tree out in the middle of the forest? They could have different nutrient reduction benefits. The size of the canopy of the tree. Some trees are small, some trees are large. They might get larger later and their benefits can change. You know, the season of the tree, deciduous trees go dormant in the winter and don't have as much canopy coverage. The storm event characteristics, like how much rainfall over what amount of time, the soil type that the trees are growing in. Some soils just naturally can infiltrate water better than others. And also the nutrient uptake can be variable based on your soil type. Sometimes if your soil is if its pH is severely altered, certain nutrients can become tied up in soils. And the exact benefits of trees are really hard to quantify, is the point. But the one thing that is just agreed upon by everyone and is undeniable is that trees do help protect water resources. So I broke it down into two general ways to think about it. Think about how trees are protecting water resources. There's urban and suburban trees, like these street trees in Prince Frederick. Their functions to protect water resources by intercepting, slowing down stormwater, helping infiltrate it. And then the trees in a forested riparian buffer. They do all the same things that a street tree can do, but then they also have some direct benefits to the body of water that they're growing right next to. So interception. Trees, they act like umbrellas for the earth. The canopy can retain and detain precipitation. So this is really important when we're trying to restore the natural water cycle regimen by slowing down and giving that precipitation time to infiltrate into the ground. And this is just a really big, beautiful canopy in this tree. So the canopy of a tree is just, the top of it. The leaves, the twigs, that structure is what we're talking about when we say canopy. So trees can retain a certain volume of water. So this is water precipitation that stays on the leaves, twigs, the trunk. I found some really interesting papers where there are scientists that are actually measuring how much water can actually be retained on the surface of a leaf and using that number to try to quantify how much water is actually retained in the entire canopy of a tree. And they were finding that between 1/4 of a millimeter and some trees could retain over an entire millimeter of water on the surface of their leaves. So this is precipitation that never makes it to the ground and it doesn't have the opportunity to become stormwater runoff. It's retained. It doesn't go down to the ground. It evaporates directly back into the atmosphere, and different trees can retain different quantities based on their leaf characteristics. And I have another slide that'll show a little bit more about that. And then there's detention, where the water's slowed down in the canopy, but it does eventually run off of the tree's leaves, twigs, or trunks. So if you ever stand outside on a rainy day, you'll see that branches slowly dripping down. And this slowing down of the water is important because it allows for a better chance of infiltration of that water on site so that it does not become stormwater runoff. So stem flow is just the water that trickles down the branches, trickles down the trunk. And in this picture, you can see how in a gentle afternoon rainstorm, you can actually see the pattern of the water flowing down this big beech tree, how it flows down gently. So it slowly feeds the water to the ground surface to allow for better infiltration over time. So slowing down water as it journeys towards the surface of the water is really important because I think a good analogy for this is if you think about having a bucket of water and you're dump that entire bucket of water out all at once onto the ground, it's going to cause a puddle that spreads and goes away and runs off. But if you take that same amount of water and slowly dump it, pour it very slowly over time, it can infiltrate into that ground. So it's like a volume over time type thing. If we can slow down that water getting to the surface, that soil can handle absorbing it. So in street trees, it's also important because they kind of act as like funnels that can direct the water to an area at the base of the tree where infiltration can be possible, because sometimes street trees are planted in pretty narrow margins where there's impervious surface, like a sidewalk on one side and a street on the other side, and they kind of like funnel that water down to their base where infiltration can happen. So, like I said before, your leaf shape, the size, and the texture of the leaf, they can all impact the tree's overall capacity to retain and detain stormwater. you have all kinds of different leaf shapes. Something like a really skinny, long pine needle is going to have a smaller, lesser capacity than something like a really broad, kind of heart-shaped catalpa leaf. It's just a bigger surface, so you have more surface area to retain things on. And the other interesting thing when you start to look up close at different leaves under microscopes, these are diagrams on the one side of the different surface textures that you can have on leaves. Some leaves have really smooth, waxy surfaces. They're very hydrophobic and will run water off of them readily. And then other leaves have like almost fuzzy surfaces and they can retain more water. So there's a lot of variables that go into being able to measure how much water can a canopy in a tree actually capture. And then, of course, you have your seasonal variation in the deciduous trees interception rates. So it's really quite obvious when you look at a picture of the winter time where the deciduous trees are dormant and they've dropped all their leaves versus the summertime where they're out in full leaf. Of course, they're going to have higher interception rates during the summer. An evergreen tree where it's not dropping all its leaves all at once to go dormant can have a more steady interception rate than a deciduous tree that has this seasonal change in their canopy. Some other factors that I was finding when I was reading about a tree's ability to retain or intercept stormwater precipitation is just the texture of the bark. Like in this photo on this slide, this is a pine tree with a really very textured bark. There's lots of surface area and crevices, and it probably slows down water and retains it better than a really smooth barked tree, like a beech tree that has that smooth gray bark. And then, of course, the angle of the branches on a tree can affect this. Some trees have this very vase shape, like upright branching habit where it's just a more steep slope. So water can run down quicker than a branch that has a more outwards type habit. And then some of the other variables that I actually thought were really interesting was the wind speed. If you have a really windy day, it can shake the leaves and drop more water off. So the rainfall intensity can also impact how much water can be intercepted and retained in the tree's canopy. If you have a very steady, slow rainfall over a prolonged period of time, that is more gentle, it can collect more in the canopy than if you have something like a huge downpour that's just pelting through and knocking leaves and shaking things off. So it was really interesting reading about all the factors that they encounter when they're trying to quantify how much can a tree actually really do. So some other things that trees do to help mitigate for stormwater are it's very important for infiltration. Their roots keep pathways in the soil open. So I really like this photo just to demonstrate just how extensive tree roots can actually be. I wish there was a human in this for scale, but this root ball of this toppled over tree is actually about 6 feet tall, and you can see all the root structure that it's given to the soil, and you can imagine that all those pathways are kept open to let water infiltrate into the soil, where if there weren't tree roots or plant roots there, that soil could potentially become compacted and impervious itself because of high compaction rates. So trees definitely help prevent compaction, especially in suburban areas, city areas. They can help really break apart that soil and allow for infiltration. They also help with infiltration by actually creating storage space in the soil. And this is particularly relevant, I think, in more suburban areas. So trees take up water and use it for their biological processes. So they're taking that groundwater up, drinking the water they need, and losing water vapor to the atmosphere that they don't need. So we're restoring part of the water cycle too, where we have the transpiration back to the atmosphere. And using the water that's in that soil, it creates more storage space for infiltration of more stormwater. So if you have a really moist area and there's no plants using that water, the soil is fully saturated. And if you get another rainstorm, the soil cannot accept any more of that water, and it actually becomes an impervious surface itself and generates its own runoff. But if you have a couple plants and trees in there, then they'll use up that water between rainstorms and it makes more storage space. I always think of transpiration as analogous to the way we drink water. We're humans, we drink water and then we sweat. So I always think of that as tree sweat, if it's a new term and you want a simplified way to remember. Another couple ways that trees help with infiltration is that they condition the soil to be more light, to be more fluffy, to have higher organic matter content, and this helps to keep soil able to receive larger volumes of water. And the leaf litter that trees create, it helps to slow the flow of the water and it promotes infiltration. So all these things help to restore the natural water cycle. Okay, and finally over to our riparian buffers. So riparian buffers are the vegetated strips of land directly adjacent to a stream, and forested buffers are more effective at protecting a waterway than an unforested buffer. This diagram that I found in a Chesapeake Bay publication, it really demonstrates well what we mean by riparian buffers. So if you look up at the top of the diagram, you can imagine this arrow as stormwater runoff traveling across. If there's no buffer in place, that runoff can go directly to a waterway without any sort of filtration, processing, taking out nutrients. And then in the center, you have a thinner buffer, so you get some uptake of nutrients, some slowing down of the stormwater, some sediment retention in this buffer area. So a thin buffer is better than no buffer. But then the best buffer really is this wide vegetated buffer. So in the riparian buffer, the plants that exist there, they have an opportunity to take up nutrients from both the groundwater that's traveling towards that surface of water, the stream, and also any nutrients that are traveling through in the form of runoff. The plants in a riparian buffer also stabilize the soil with their roots and they slow down the runoff. And this helps to prevent erosion, which can contribute to sediment loading in waterways, which is an issue for many reasons. Among them is it buries habitat for aquatic insects and fish, and then they won't be able to reproduce well. And then the benefit that riparian buffers have, especially in smaller streams, is that they provide shade to the waterway to help keep the stream temperatures lower. So in streams, you can end up being impaired for temperature. If the temperature of a body of water is too high, the amount of dissolved oxygen that body of water can hold is reduced. And this is an issue for things that breathe with gills and rely on that water as habitat. So having a forested canopy over a small stream helps to keep that stream cool, and it makes better habitat for the animals that live in it. So this is just a cross section of a riparian buffer to give another visualization of how they can work. So working from left to right, you can see maybe there's an agricultural farm field that you can imagine if these cattle or these cropland was brought straight up to the edge of the stream, that would be pretty devastating. There would be a lot of nutrient runoff and erosion issues for that stream. But with the buffer in place, you get this little initial section of grassy area that helps to slow down the flow of the water. It helps to start dropping any sediment that's in the runoff out of suspension. So it collects sediment, keeps it from getting into the waterway. And then you get to the treed area that provides even more nutrient reduction benefits in the water. It drops any sediment out, and then you get to this immediate streamside buffer area where these trees are stabilizing the stream bank, preventing erosion issues on the stream bank, maintaining the banks as high quality habitat. And riparian buffers, it was interesting too that they're they're beneficial no matter what size stream or waterway they're along. That was definitely agreed upon. But some of the benefits are higher in your little tiny headwater streams, the first order streams. And then as you get towards larger bodies of water, of course, a riparian buffer isn't going to be able to shade the entire Potomac River at the mouth where it dumps out into the Chesapeake Bay. So you get a reduction in that shading water temperature control benefit in your larger streams. So the benefits aren't all equal across all stream sizes. They change over what size stream you're dealing with, but they're definitely always good to protect streams. So I didn't want to do a presentation all about trees without just throwing a slide in so that we all know that trees provide many ecosystem services for us all. So they're, habitat and food for many living creatures. They regulate temperature on land. If you sit under the shade of the tree, you're receiving a benefit from a tree. They provide building materials for our homes. They're just naturally beautiful. They're a fuel source. If you ever heat your home with wood fuel, they provide us all with fresh air to breathe. We can make paper out of the trees. We can make medicine out of the trees. And then this photo in this slide is a photo of a leaf out of a stream. So they even provide in-stream aquatic macroinvertebrate habitat for little tiny insects in their larval stage in the stream. Their leaves provide habitat in streams. So trees all around are really important. They provide a lot of things for us. It's important that we take care of them and take care of the trees we have and plant more trees. So some really simple ideas that I came up with just to share of things that we can do, things that I feel like we could all try to do to protect the trees that we have. One of the things that I think is a larger threat to mature trees is non-native invasive vines like English ivy or wisteria. They can be really devastating when these vines get up into the canopy of trees. They can smother them and kill mature canopy trees. So in this picture on the slide, this is a really nice mature tree that we have saved as part of a English ivy project that we've been working on, where we just severed the English ivy vines about 2 or 3 feet up the tree trunk. You sever the vines at the ground level, and you've cut off the supply of food for that English ivy, and it'll eventually just die, and it won't be able to continue growing and smothering that mature tree. So I feel like I'm on a campaign against English ivy, so join me. Clip all the English ivy you can. And then, of course, you can use good management practices to encourage healthy forests if you are managing an area of land. Sometimes you may need to take out some trees to have more healthy trees, to have better benefits, and then properly take care of street trees if you're in an area. So we definitely want to protect and care for the trees that we already have. And of course, we want to plant more trees. You can plant trees anywhere at your home, in your neighborhood, in your community gathering place. Another really great way to promote planting more trees is to collect native tree seeds for propagation. Every fall, I see volunteer events that they go and collect things like acorns and bring them to the Forest Service. They have a native plant nursery where they produce trees with locally gathered seed. So that's a really fun initiative to help increase the native trees. And finally, I wanted to tell everyone about a program that is available in Southern Maryland to help plant more trees. It is the Backyard Buffers program. It is a program that is a partnership between the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, the Forest Service, and a local county-based entity. In Charles County, Calvert County, and St. Mary's County, that local entity is the University of Maryland Extension. In Anne Arundel County, the local entity that hosts the program is the Anne Arundel Watershed Stewards Academy. So county by county, it can vary. Through this program, you can get bundles of bare root tree seedlings. They're always native Maryland plants that you can plant to help protect water resources. And this program is also to help meet the 5 million tree goal. So in 2021, there was a piece of legislation passed that is just created an initiative to reforest, and the 5 million trees is towards that goal. So what is in the bundle? What does this entail? It varies by county and by year, but it's always Maryland natives. This year's bundles, I know the information for Calvert, St. Mary's, and Charles. So Calvert County, the bundles, this is a picture of a previous year's bundle so that everyone knows what a bare root seedling actually looks like and what to expect. You're getting little tiny tree saplings that are not potted or anything. They have a gel-like substance around them that keeps them hydrated, that is a benign substance, and they just need to be planted as soon as possible. So these are the species for Calvert. It's a American plum, willow oak, black haw viburnum, and hazelnut. And then the bundles in St. Mary's and Charles County, they're the same species selection, different number of seedlings. These numbers are how many of each seedling. So in St. Mary's and Charles, you get buttonbush, common persimmon, swamp white oak, and flowering dogwood. And then if you're up in Anne Arundel County, check the Watershed Stewards Academy website for information. Last I checked, it was not updated quite yet, but that's where you go if you're in Anne Arundel. How do you sign up if you're in Southern Maryland counties? I'll put this on the end of the presentation too, and I can come back to it. So don't panic if you don't get all this. But if you're in Calvert or St. Mary's County, I am your county coordinator for the program. You can sign up by using these QR codes that go directly to your specific county sign up form, or you can email me if you need help signing up. In Charles County, the Master Gardeners are the contact, and this is the email contact or the sign up form for Charles County. And we all talk to each other in extension. So if you're in any county, you can talk to me and I'll get you the right sign up. So your trees count. We like counting things. I made that clear. This is just a screenshot of a dashboard that's the 5 Million Trees Initiative. You can go and put your trees into this system and have them actually counted towards that 5 million tree goal. So it's 5 million trees by 2031 is the goal, is to plant and maintain 5 million trees in the state of Maryland. And there's specific target areas that they want to emphasize planting in like more urban areas, but they want them planted everywhere. So you can make your trees count if you want by going and using that website. So I hope I weaved together the story of how land use changes can change the natural water cycle and how putting trees back, using best management practices, how this can try to draw the natural water cycle back in a little bit. Trees can be part of the solution. And, we can all make positive changes with little small practices. I really think that everyone doing a small practice can really add up, especially when I think about the 5 Million Trees Initiative. So when you think about the population of the state of Maryland, there's 6 million people living in the state of Maryland. I know that doesn't mean that every last single person can plant a tree, but 6 million people can definitely make change if we're all working together, and we can easily attain a 5 million tree goal. So this is my favorite quote when I think about how we can successfully manage stormwater. It's just great things are done by a series of small things brought together. I think that really talks to the idea of using treatment trains and just treating the stormwater as close to the source as possible. This is my contact, and I'll just skip again to this slide just in case y'all wanted the sign up information for the Backyard Buffers program. So with that, that is all the information I have to present for this evening. And if there's any questions, I am happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Caroline. That was very interesting. There was a lot of good information. We do have one question in the chat right now from Eileen. She's asking, why are the tree species so different for each county?
It's because that's what got picked. So we get a list from the state nursery, and it's just what you pick. It changes every year. So and also with the, if you notice, like Calvert County has less actual seedlings in the bundle. It's because they went with a slightly higher price seedling. So they only get 12 in their bundle. And then if you notice in the Charles and Calvert bundles, with the flowering dogwood, you only get 3 because it's a little more expensive. So it's a mix of cost considerations and personal preference for who picked the species for the counties. There's not a secret number or anything behind it.
If anybody has any other questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute your mics or turn on your videos, now would be a good time. Do you have anything else you would like us to know about trees and how they affect the water cycle?
That covers it. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'll assume that no questions means it was thorough.
It was, yeah, I had a few questions and I was gonna type them and then I waited a little bit and you answered them, so it was very informative and I really appreciate you coming on today. And I appreciate all of the participants. I know it is Super Bowl Sunday and some people might wanna go watch that, so I really appreciate you guys coming to watch us. We do have a question from Catherine. She says that she lives in Frederick County. Any suggestions for bare-rooted trees in our area?
Frederick County. Let me stop screen sharing. And so the Backyard Buffers program does cover other parts of the state. Um, do. There is a contact on the DNR website for Frederick County, and I can copy and paste that into the chat.
Perfect, thank you. We also have another question from Wes asking if the previous webinars have been recorded and are available online. And they have. We posted them to the Maryland RC&D Facebook, or excuse me, the YouTube page. I can grab a link to that and put it in the chat so that way everybody can have access to it and you can go back and watch the previous seminars. And I will get this one uploaded as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well,
Perfect.
thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you so much. And again, thank you all for joining us. We do have another winter seminar, our last one for the year. It's on March 9th. If you'd like to join us, we will be learning about how to conserve and protect corals. So that one will be very interesting as well. And
Awesome.
yeah, so thank you, Caroline.
Thanks.